Welcome back to Fresh Economic Thinking. A special guest today, Jim Penman. You might know Jim's face from the side of a trailer driving around your neighborhood, mowing lawns for your friends and family. Yes, that's the very famous Jim from Jim's Mowing. Thanks for coming, Jim.
Good to be here.
I want to get in and talk about your philosophy, your political writings, and your run for politics, but we're going to have to start with lawn mowing because when I was 14 and my brother was 16, my dad made us hand out flyers to all the neighbors to go and mow lawns in our suburb. And that's what we did for a few years. And I think he got his inspiration from you. So now that I've actually spoken to you, I just want to say thanks for starting the Murray lawn mowing business or inspiring it.
I think your dad's a smart man. Good way to start. I started in very early too. I started at the age of 8, so I've been doing it virtually all my life in one sense or other.
That's brilliant. So
Yeah.
for people who don't know your face from mowing, what's your story? You're a businessman, now turned political candidate. How do you sort of summarize your business and political story for people you meet?
Well, isn't not really the same thing. I'm simply a businessman who happens to be interested in
Oh,
politics. I have a fairly good public profile. I don't know that there are any connections. I mean, in business, you get to see a lot of stuff that's very frustrating. You understand bureaucracy, red tape. My wife's a property developer. We've been involved with things like the franchising code and all kinds of things like work cover and all the work safe, this kind of stuff. So you see the shocking cost that's dragging down our economy. I mean, in a sense, you might say the economy depends on businessmen running a race. It's like we're like the Olympic athletes, and,
mhm.
and we're trying to win for Australia. We're trying to drive up the standard of living and cut costs and improve productivity. So we're running for the Olympics, and the government is saying, okay, well, we want you to win, but here's a ball and chain. We'd like you to have to your feet, so you go drag them along. But they won't slow you down because everybody knows Olympic athletes who's pulling a 20-kilo weight can run just as fast as one without. So it's kind of like the situation.
Right. So are there any sort of specific examples, whether in lawn mowing or property, that really um, you use to just demonstrate this cost or the weight of the ball and chain?
Well, take property development for a start. First of all, the zoning system is insane. It basically
Mm.
says, okay, let's bring 500,000 people into the country every year, and let's put the iron hand of government to forbid anybody to build enough houses for them. What could possibly go wrong? So the government artificially restricts what you can do with land. That is the worst problem. They say, you're in the inner suburbs, quarter acre lots, great for the millionaires to live in these greasy. What people who want to live, oh no, they can go out and live out, up in the countryside. They can drive 2 hours to work every day. That scumbags, they don't matter. So why don't we have? All you have to do is to lift the dead hand of government off the zoning, and you'd immediately find the housing become more affordable, rents go down. It's very easy. You can see comparisons like in the States between a city like Houston, which is low regulation, and
Mm.
like say San Francisco, which is the worst,
Mm.
but the greenest city in the whole country. Um, Property prices in San Francisco are 4 times as much, and and
Yeah.
and the rents are dramatically higher. All that's difference is the zoning. So we could do the same thing. We could have our house prices in half what they are now. That's roughly speaking. It's doubling the cost of housing and massively increasing the cost of rent simply because the government says you can't build what you want.
Well, I'm going to have to push back a little, Jim, because
Go on, yeah.
prices are expensive and have risen around the world in all sorts of zoning. And what we find in places like Texas is that where you don't have a government create sets of rules, the private sector will create even more onerous rules. A good example in Australia is if I have a master plan community, a lend lease, a stockland type community, in addition to local regulations, I want to impose even more rules on what color you can paint your fence and what materials you can use for your garage door. Now, are those rules
Why
okay,
why
but
do
the
you want?
government ones not okay?
No, why are they okay? If it's your own property, you should be able to do with what. I mean, I don't suggest we put a
Well,
factory in the middle of a housing development and domestic development, but within broad guidelines, let householders do what they want. Don't have any restrictions at all on anything. Why would
I,
you want private controls? I don't want either.
I guess the controls were put on when, for example, Lend-Lease did own the property, and those rules passed down, as a covenant with the property. Are they,
Why are you
is
defending
that
them?
not okay? Like,
No,
how would you avoid those things? Because they're very common in Texas with homeowners associations and things.
yeah, yes, sure they
And
are. I'm not saying Houston is the ideal. Houston is far too restrictive from my point of view. I don't think there should be virtually any zoning regulation at all. This is what
okay.
libertarians think. You just
Ah,
don't restrict it. If you own the property within broad limits, like don't put a factory in a residential zone, you just put it next to another factory, you should be able to do
okay.
what you want.
Okay, well, okay, here's a hypothetical. I've just put solar panels on my roof, and the next door neighbor builds 15 meters, and now I can't get any power from my solar because I'm in their shadow. Should there be rules about that? How would you resolve that as a libertarian?
You build your own place higher too. But you said that the neighbour's not going to build 15 stories up in a one level, but they're much more likely going to want to buy out all the houses in the street and build like 3 stories up or 2 stories up, something like maybe one of the problems you got right now is that they say, okay,
Hmm.
we're going to have quarter acre lots with lawns and everything else and places for a car, or we're going to have a high-rise multi-story apartment. Now that's an insanely stupid thing to do. If you let cities develop organically, you find a range. In the really intense areas near cities, in a city, you'll have high buildings. Later on, you'll get sort of terrace housing, 2 story, three housing.
Hmm.
Further around, you get it's a natural way to live, and cities grow like that if you let them. So the idea that someone's going to build a 15-story house next to yours is ridiculous because nobody would want to, because they can do it in an area where it's much better, like next to the station. Why would they want to? Unless the zoning says you can't build it next to the station, you can't build it in a city, only way
Hmm.
they can build it is next to your place. And that's not a problem. That's a problem with not having enough choice.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of examples. I mean, I can look out the window of my small detached house to, 12-story buildings just across the road. So there's lots of those situations come up. And
Yeah.
I guess
But
my
but but
question
zoning
for
makes
you is,
But
you know,
zoning
before,
makes that happen because you artificially stop people building where they want to build. And you say, we've decided that now we want to put this multi-story thing bang in the middle of a domestic area. That's just stupid. It just is, it's zoning is the problem. The problems you're talking about are zoning problems.
yeah, well, I guess when I read the history, there were cities before there was zoning, right?
Yeah.
And they weren't exactly cheap, nice, beautiful places. They generally had a lot of conflict about urban use, a lot of wealth side by side with poverty, which would be, representative of the big building next to the old detached house. And
But hang on a
I
minute.
guess I'm
Let me
getting
let
to
me
a
look at that.
broader point about libertarianism is, don't the rules come from somewhere? Isn't there a Chesterton's fence type uh, sort of reflection we should have when we talk
Okay,
about
let's
these rules?
let's look at it from the point of view of the less fortunate. Okay, people who
Hmm.
let's forget about the multimillionaires for a bit. Just I know that's they're the ones that run the country basically and run all these things, but let's look at it from an ordinary, so a battling, a struggler. Now, if you were a battling person, where would you want to do? Would you want to go into an environment where there's just poor people only, rat infested tenements, and be completely barred from most of it and only have neighbors who were that kind of people? Or would you rather be in a mixed area where your kids have a chance to mix with and see examples of people who've got more education, more money, so they could? Where would you want to live? Would you want to live far or far away, so you have to travel enormous distance and cost to get you, or you'd like to live close to your work? You'll choose to live in a mixed environment close to work. That's what used to happen. Cities used to be very much more mixed, and you had people who were kids who could see role models of successful people, and they could join them, be part of them, and they could have opportunity to rise. It's very, very wrong what we're doing. We're separating out the classes. We're creating these privileged estates. We're barring ordinary people. It's not good for society. It's creating inequality. It's in creating apartments. People are drifting apart, and it shouldn't happen. The old way was much better.
Look, yeah, I guess I see your overall thesis there. I guess the more I read of sort of pre-war pre-World War II history of the cities, the more I see that it was segregated. There was great wealth inequality. Home ownership was very low, 43% in the capital cities before the Second World War, 71 to 2% by the end of the 1960s. So, which was the era of big government intervention in housing and, the original big zoning and planning regime. So I guess I have a sort of different interpretation of what the free market leads to and the reason these rules exist, because
Sorry, your examples are wrong. There's all kinds of reasons. People are a lot poor in those days. They couldn't afford to. But the fact of the matter is, going back after the Second World War, you could buy a house with like 3 years average income. That's like being able to buy a house in Melbourne or Sydney for $300,000. That's the equivalent that's what you want to do. Now, you say we're going to go back to the old days of not being able to buy houses if we halve the cost of housing. I don't see how that matters. Surely to goodness, if you cut the cost of houses in half, you wouldn't decrease home ownership, you'd increase it. It's illogical to say
I
you
mean,
get a bit of zoning and you'll have more people owning their own houses. Why would the fact that a house costs double make you more likely to buy it? To get a struggling couple, okay, just married, just getting together, want to have a family, all right. They're now faced with $1 million bill, extra cost. It's going to cost them $30,000 a year, or they could buy a house that's going to cost half that and pay $15,000 a month. I mean, it's.
Well, I guess I'd raise a couple of points for you. There was a lot of credit rationing after the Second World War when houses were cheap. Is that something you'd like? That the government limits who can borrow money and at what prices so that only certain people can buy houses?
Cameron, you're talking to a libertarian, asking me if
I
I think
know.
the government should be involved in restricting credit.
I guess
is a bit like asking me if I'm a fundamentalist Christian who believes in sex for everybody. I mean, come on. Obviously, I don't want the government to be doing those things. The government messes things up. Government gets involved, your prices go up, your quality goes down. That is what government is good for.
I guess I'm trying to work towards the point that in a free market, isn't it true that if prevailing mortgage rates are low, that the price must be higher, because housing, like any other asset, is simply the capitalized expected future income flows. And so, if we have very low interest rates, for example, compared to the 1980s, a third, then prices should be 3 times higher. So if there were 3 times price to income in the 80s, they should be 9 times now. And the cost of borrowing the money.
You're absolutely correct. And that's why, if you look at it, look up the median house price in Houston and the house price in Texas, exactly the same interest rate, they're exactly the same by logic. If what you're saying is the only thing that matters is the interest rate, the prices are the same. They're not. They're 4 times higher in San Francisco than Houston. Same country, same immigration policy. Houston's got immigrants. People are going into Houston. They're going from Texas, from California. They're going, so you've got higher immigration, and yet prices are a quarter. If mortgage is the only thing, theoretically speaking, they're the same, but in fact, they're not. Look it up.
I know the data, but the incomes are vastly different as well, right? So if you've got a high income place, won't prices be more there in general? Like, are there high income cities with low rents and prices, or is part of that just the income differential between those cities?
Well, Texas is pretty well off. It's not quite the level of somewhere like San Francisco, but that's partly because people can't afford to live in San Francisco. The people who work in San Francisco, like your teachers and your police, they typically drive 2 hours to get to work and 2 hours to get home. They live in satellite cities. That's how they manage it. Otherwise, you couldn't run the city because you can't afford to live there.
Yeah. So I guess, though, you wouldn't be keen on the property tax regime of the cities in Texas, though? You would differentiate yourself there?
Oh, I don't speak on behalf of the Libertarian Party. My view is that land taxes should be a lot higher.
Oh, interesting. Some common ground. Yes, I'm definitely with you.
Land taxes is the one tax. There's a lot of very bad taxes. Stamp duty is very bad tax because it stops people building, selling, and going to a place where they can be close to employment. It's a bad tax. Having an overly high company taxes is bad because you push people overseas. And we don't do that. But that's what people do. They go to low tax environments. So having a really high company tax is good. income taxes have a real problem because they drive avoidance. But land tax you can't avoid. You cannot take your property and dump it in the Cayman Islands and pay no land tax on it. It's there, it's in the city, so you can't move it. And what that does, though, is put posh property into the hands of those who can best use it. So, for example, you get a supermarket that says, let's land bank, let's buy up all this land so we can stop Aldi and the discounters so we can have the most expensive groceries in the world. That's our aim. And the government says, yeah, sure, you can land bank it. We're not going to charge you much on that. But if you put a proper tax on it, they'll say, wow, I can't afford this. So they sell it out. And then the Aldi comes in and they get some competition and fruit prices come down. So that's a winner. Land taxes are great. Read The Economist. They're always talking about it. It's fantastic. Now, the wonderful thing about land tax, it could be the most progressive tax in the world because what you do is you give every individual a certain allowance, which is so the average person, up to about the average, they pay nothing. Now, that's whether you're a owner or whether you're renting a property, it goes to the landlord. And what that means is that somebody who's a squillionaire, who's got a property worth $10 million, on a half acre in a posh suburb, is going to be hit with this gigantic tax again and again until they say, ooh, no, this is too much. I know I like living here, but maybe I could actually have this place redeveloped, no zoning, don't forget. Then I could put enough for, say, 30 people to live close to accommodation, close to public transport and work and everything else. And I'll go and live way out in the countryside. And instead of making everybody else commute, then I'll commute. That's what you do.
That was a great pitch for land tax. Do you find I could have asked my most lefty friends about land taxes and they would have said similar things to you. Do you find it odd that there's a lot of common ground at the sort of the left and the right on land taxes and reducing income taxes and replacing them
I
with
don't
land
think there's a
taxes?
lot of ground between the left and the right on that thing. But
Really?
look, my kids who are very lefty, they're all greeny bugs, and my younger ones, they actually say I'm woke because I'm very much in favour of redistribution of wealth. All
Ah,
my assets is not how can you make the rich richer, but how can you be fairer in what you do. Look, let me
right.
give you an example. Okay, I bought two properties next door to each other 23 years ago for just under $3 million. Now, if you kept pace with inflation, they'd be worth 5.5 million. So roughly, I've done the calculation. They're worth about $10 million. That $4.5 million benefit is given to me, a multi-millionaire, for nothing that I've done. That's wrong. That's unfair because the expense of that is that ordinary people cannot afford to buy houses at all because you're making me rich. And the trouble with the Liberal Party is this, and I used to support them. I used to do fundraisers for them. I had Peter Costello, I had Tony Abbott, I've had them all come to do fundraisers because I believe in free enterprise. But they're worse on this stuff than the Labor Party is. Labor Party is at least trying to make a difference. They're trying to relax the zoning a little bit. And the Liberals who've got all these well-pocketed people, they don't want this. They want the millionaire stuff. That's why
Ah.
Liberals are useless. That's why I won't support them anymore.
Oh, that's really interesting. Um,
Yeah. I
well, I
reckon if
think,
you look at tax, I reckon someone like Scandinavia's got a better idea than us. I would favour personally, I'm not speaking as a libertarian, speaking as
yeah.
a private individual, I would favour a more equitable distribution
And so,
of
along with,
income.
uh, look, I mean, I'm completely with you. I guess the real trick is how to do it politically, and also how to do it in a sensible economic way that without too many and unintended consequences. So, on that note, then, do you know about Queensland's change in the royalty rates of I think about 6 years ago for coal and gas? What do you think of them? Because they've raised a lot of money for Queensland, and they raised that only when the price was unexpectedly high. And now that the prices are falling, the royalty rates are sort of back to where they were. What's your take on that?
Oh, I'm not against carbon taxes. I think it's a good way to do it. It's better than having artificial, like shutting things down. Carbon tax is a good idea. Look, there's certain taxes that are good. Land
Mm.
tax is a good tax. Um,
Mm.
a congestion tax is a very good tax.
Mm.
That stops people want to drive into the city, for example, they get charged a lot more, especially in peak hour. That's a very good tax. Parking, that taxes like when you put very expensive intelligent parking meters, like in the city, those kinds of things. And carbon taxes. Carbon tax, if you want to reduce greenhouse emissions, carbon tax is by far the best. It's efficient, it's fair, it's reasonable. Okay. These are all good taxes. Then you've got bad taxes. And the bad taxes are things like, well, particularly stamp duty,
And
payroll tax, because that discourages employing workers. That's a really bad tax. There's a lot of bad taxes that bear ordinary people.
yeah, you're talking to one of the few probably economists in the country that think stamp duties are actually not as bad as people make out. Um, would you believe? Partly because it's not clear to me that more turnover is necessarily um, that, you know, always beneficial, right? You can have if when the cost of turnover is low, like in New Zealand, there's no stamp duty. So what you find is bigger booms and bust investors buying and selling with momentum more. And also, when they do that, you find that the reason tenants move house, the number one in New Zealand is because the owner's selling. Because the cost of selling is lower, you get more trades. So the tenants get churned out of these houses more in New Zealand than in Australia, where the cost of trading is higher. So it's not like there's no, um, undesirable consequences. We just got to balance up the net change. Uh,
The best thing for the economy is that people live where they want to live. Now,
mm,
if you want to live in a if you want to live close to work with a good paying job, that's actually better for the individual and better for the economy. So if you make it more cost effective people to live in a area with lots and lots of well paying businesses, then you actually help them to get a better income, and it's also better for the economy because they're actually more productive living in those high income areas than they are living out in the countryside because they can't afford to live in the city.
I guess
Economically, it's better for ordinary people.
how do you resolve that? For example, when we talk about increasing land taxes, one of the debates that comes up is what about the pensioners? I mean, can't they live where they want to live and they want to live where they are? And now you're basically saying, yeah, but bad luck, you have to move. How do you
Yeah.
reconcile that people should live where they want to live, but then if you increase land taxes, a lot of people might be forced to move where they're currently living, which is where they want to live.
Okay, but then let's say you've got a person who's a pension living on a quarter acre lot. But don't forget, not just getting rid of land tax, you're getting rid of zoning. But they've got to go together. So what they then come along and they say, okay, I'm living in this property, which is also a bit much for me to maintain and stuff like that. I've got to get Jim's mowing in to mow the lawns, which is good for us, but still, it's a problem for them. House, the kids have moved out, all right. You've got 3 bedrooms, quarter acre lot. I like
Mm.
living there, fine. But then you change everything with the land. We put the land tax up, but you also change the zoning, and property come knocks on their door and say, "Listen, we could give you a this amount of money. You can have a really nice, well-maintained unit. Plus, you have so much money extra that you can live comfortably the rest of your life. You never have any financial worries ever again because your house is now going to be put down as part of a row of terrace houses in this street, for example, which is suitable for
Mm.
this area. The kind of thing you have in cities like London and
Yeah, I
New
see
York
what you're
and so.
saying. Yeah. Look,
They're
I
better off.
mean,
Or alternatively, you can redevelop your land. You can put a sort of building in the backyard, or then you can subdivide your house and have a place for a tenant to come in, which you can't right now. So there's all kinds of options for this pensioner to do, which will make them better off. But also think that the young people who can now afford to live in this particularly good area, which is close to work, close to education, close to schools, which is really valuable. It's a nice thing, so they can afford to live there. So everybody's game.
so the ACT removed stamp duty for sellers over age 65 who rebought within the year in 2012. And what they found is that the stamp duty exemption wasn't facilitating a lot of downsizing, that these wealthy older families were simply using that to upgrade and buy large estates where all their family could come and stay, and they could shield more of their wealth from the pension assets test and then pay for Jim's mowing with their age pension instead. Um, so I guess that's my cautionary tale that we have in mind that we loosen up all these trades and houses get allocated more appropriately to households. But you would understand we allocate houses by price, not by need. So if there's overall wealth inequality, we still, it's not clear that that's going to get compressed by more trading in the property market. Does that make sense? My point, or have I just
Yeah, I would say that for every one person who's a pensioner who's growing out of their house, goes and buys a mansion everywhere else, you probably got 10 pensioners who go and live in a unit or a smaller one. I mean, people don't typically upsize when they get bigger. Oh, look, I've had 3 bedroom house for my kids. Now that the kid grown up, let's have a 10 bedroom house. I mean, it sometimes happens, yes, but on the whole, it won't.
So
Absolutely won't. What we're
yeah,
doing is driving inequality. When you
mm,
have restrictive zoning, when you have, then you push people to, it forces up the price of housing. That's a simple thing, and that's bad for equality. When you make it harder for people to own their own houses because they can't afford to buy, that's
yeah,
bad for equality. It just is. If you force people, they can't live in the most desirable areas because they're made too expensive. They can't live close to their work. Then that pushes up inequality. We don't need that. We need a more equal, more fair society. I think we've got to look at it. What about the people in the street who are dying in the street because they're homeless? Now that's a real
mm,
problem because if you are homeless in the street, you are more likely to die. And the very fact of the matter is the one thing that more than anything else determines whether a person is homeless. I mean, mental illness, there's problems with there. But if you lower the cost of rent, people can afford to move off the street. That is the best thing you can do. And the only way you can do that is to build more houses and more housing. And the only way to do
yeah.
that is to cut down on the zoning. It's not just zoning, by the way, too. There's lots of other things, too. You want to build a you've got to go, it takes you 6 months to get a permit to do something. Now, everybody thinks, well, that's wonderful because that's all those greedy developers make less profits. No, they don't. They put the price up. That's what happens. Every time you make it difficult for a person to build. And when you do insane things like we have a thing called Australian standards. Okay, so let's
Mm,
talk about a system that you have in the EC, which is a really environmentally everything environment where you can use a certain form of very new, great building structure, which is cheap, which is efficient, which is good insulation. You can't use it in Australia because it doesn't meet Australian standards. It's good enough for the Scandinavians, it's good enough for the Germans, but
yeah.
Australian standards, no, you can't do that. So that's
I'm
one of the things. All these extra things force up the price of housing too. It's not just zoning.
Can I, so just to be clear, you're saying that if new techniques and materials have met European standards, for example, for
Yes.
construction, we should just automatically allow them here. We should have automatic recognition of
If it's a
stand
yes,
by
if it's
comparable.
available in any advanced economy like
Mm,
Europe, like well, Western Europe anyway,
yeah,
like Scandinavia, like United States, like Canada, if it's available there, we should be able to use it. We shouldn't have to stay around for 10 years using inferior products
yeah,
and just because we haven't got around to changing things. That's just stupid. Look,
yeah.
governments work to privilege all the any rules we make, they privilege the better off because they're the ones that are the levers of power. That's exactly how it works. They do things. Whatever you think you're going to do, if you have rent controls, for example, you think that
Hmm.
helps ordinary people. It doesn't. The people that actually do benefit are the affluent who've got these rent control apartments. They pay virtually no rent for decades.
Yeah.
The poor people can't afford to buy at all because nobody's building anything. Because why would you when you can't make any money out of it? So the tenements sort of they fall to rack and ruin and decay, and the people live in these squalid environments. It's all forced by policies which are supposed to help the ordinary people, but actually end up helping the wealthy.
Well, speaking of policies that are meant to help the ordinary, that help the wealthy, I'm interested in your sort of libertarian or personal take on superannuation in Australia. I've been very outspoken. Superannuation, is a predominantly the tax breaks go to the top 20% of households who would never been on the age pension. The bottom third of people, don't really get to benefit from it because they've had disrupted work lives and other things. They hasn't really done much for them except make them poorer while they're working. And yet the overhead costs, just the fees on superannuation alone, are about 30 billion. There's about 50,000 people employed in the sector. Of course, all of these people would be, not all of them, but some of them would be doing other funders management type things without super. And so not all those costs are avoidable. And there's about 40 billion in tax breaks. Of course, not all that is we'll get some of it back, but not all of it. What's your take on that? Do you think the benefits of super from saving outweigh those, or do you think the libertarian people should have their money when they get it? How do you balance that one up?
And I believe in compulsory superannuation because we can't afford some pensions for everybody. We hardly have any kids these days. Who's going to pay for the future pensions if we don't save for ourselves? But there should be a very tough limit on how much you can actually take away. Maybe a couple of $1 million, absolute maximum. I know they're screaming about making it less than $3 million, but let's face it. Okay, I'm a multi-millionaire. I'm never going to be scrapping for a scrap of bed. I have superannuation. Why? Because it's a tax lurk. It's nothing to do with my old age. I'm not going to need it. Okay, so why should I have access to superannuation? It should only be up to a very, very limited level. Maybe
So
maybe $1.5 million, something like that. So enough so that you've got some sort of comfort in your old age, but not to be a massive rort, which it is. And there's a lot of things that are rorts. What about negative gearing, for example? That's a ruddy rort, and it's unnecessary because if you didn't have it, when you force up the price of property, people couldn't afford to rent. But if you took away the zoning and you had affordable housing, and people could afford to be landlords without the negative gearing thing, because then you get a decent return, then you wouldn't need it. So a lot of these things are tax lurks. They actually end up helping the better off.
yeah, I mean, I'm glad you see clearly on a lot of these things. I mean, I think we've got slightly different views on housing. So here's another one that's sort of like super in that sort of public-private. Is it a waste? How should we manage it? Do you think we're overeducated? Are too many people racking up, overpaying for university, having a HECS debt lurk over them? Or do you think that sort of system of subsidized unlimited places for citizens is working?
I think we spend far too much money educating people to become sociologists and art historians, and not enough helping people to become plumbers and electricians. I've said this quite often. Most of education from the point of view of society, most of higher education is a complete waste from the point of view of the economy. There's a wonderful book called The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan, I think, which is,
Yeah,
I
I know
love
him.
this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he points out that in fact, from the point of view of the individual, getting a tertiary degree is good because it gives you an advantage with the employer. But from the point of view of actually making you any more employable, useful, it does absolutely nothing. And you know this because if a person does 2.5 years of a 3-year degree, they get no benefit at all.
Mm.
If they audit a course without getting a degree, they get no benefit at all. It's the parchment effect that all causes the difference. Now that's the same thing as if you're in a show for something like, and somebody stands up, and everybody else stands up because they can see it's a competitive thing. We're not seeing the stage any better. We're just standing up to compete. Well, education is like that. And you do need certain kinds of, I don't particularly want somebody becoming a doctor who's got no training at all. He just says, oh, that sounds like I'm going to handy with a knife, so I think I'll become a surgeon. You've got to have a little bit of control in that sort of area, but there's far too much. But in effect, most education is a complete loss to the community. We'd be enormously better off if we had a lot less of it. And what I find particularly obscene is policies like the Greenies, which say let's make education free, tertiary education free,
Yeah.
which is really horrible, because what you're doing then is saying let's work out a system to rip out as much money as possible from the battlers and give it to the privileged.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to have a better society. It's terrible.
I guess I'm not averse to having a pool of free education, university for high achieving, you know, kids, like, kids skimming off those really intelligent people. I mean, most countries, I do a lot of work in Saudi Arabia, and you can tell that the smartest kids in high school got creamed off by Aramco and the military, and they are just way smarter than everyone else, and they've had all their degrees paid for. So, but you can't. I guess what I'm hearing is you don't want to make it free and unlimited as well. Otherwise, people, why would you? You're just sort of incentivizing people to not work and sort of indulge
There,
themselves and not
there are far
contribute.
too many going to university to do things like arts degrees. And I can say that because I did an arts degree. I was majoring in history, so nothing more impractical than that. But I mean, I was a pretty bright kid. I wouldn't have, yeah, I did okay in school and stuff. So,
Yeah, I think
and
you
you're right,
you
there's too
even
much.
have a
There's too much.
PhD, right, Jim?
Look, we don't need more sociologists and art historians. We do need more plumbers and electricians. So what they should be doing is allocating the resources differently. So, for
Mm.
example, one of the reasons a person doesn't become a plumber is because when you're apprentice, you don't get paid very much. So they can go off and they can do an unskilled job and get paid more. What about just evening that out a bit? What about just making it a bit more profitable to become a plumber? Or you pay the employer for every year they get through,
Yeah.
they train someone. Work it that way. Because we don't have enough. We don't have enough skilled tradies. And this whole prejudice, you got to go to university and you got to sort of have you sit in front of a computer with a collar and tie, and that's a good life. But going out there doing something real like mending pipes is wrong. Is like lower. That's a bad attitude. It really is. And I'm very
I'm
blue collar in my orientation because my whole franchise system is mostly pretty blue collar. So I identify with those people. But it's a good thing. If my youngest son actually, he's supposed to go to university, but he'd rather be a builder. He's just very
yeah.
he loves doing business and things with his hands. He's not really an academic type. He's a great kid. He really is. And I think he'll make more money doing something practical like that. Let's face it,
I
I didn't make money as a historian. I made it as a lawn mowing contractor.
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of my very successful friends are tradies and they run their own businesses now. Probably more successful than my, white collar friends who are hanging around academia, seeing, signaling their intelligence, but then complaining that they're getting left behind financially. Uh, well, you can
Oh
get
yes,
out.
it's like the story of the lawyer who had this plumber come in and fix their house, and he said, You're charging more than I get as a lawyer," and he says, "Yes, I make more than I used to as a lawyer too."
That's brilliant. That's a good one. Yeah, I've been doing a little bit of renovation at the moment, and definitely appreciate where when you have a skilled trade shop who just knows how stuff works, has the right, like, just, I mean, it's an amazing to see the productivity difference between me, who I think I'm a smart guy who trying to learn this for the first time, and someone who really understands and knows what they're doing. Um, I guess there's a lot of variation, like in all sectors of quality. So a couple more quick ones on a libertarian view. One of my pet things, bicycle helmet laws. Do you have any views? Australia is one of the only countries. Is that a part of the nanny state, or do you think it's worth keeping?
Oh, I'm probably in the middle there. I know the arguments. One of the problems with the laws is that you stop people riding as much as they would otherwise.
Mm.
And you also, we found too that people who've got helmets on, the cars give them less of a berth. They've done studies on this kind of stuff too. I think the nanny state thing is pretty even. I mean, like I think seatbelts are a great idea.
Yeah.
For
Well,
example, that's a nanny state thing, which I'd 100% be in favor of. But when you get kids can't play in playgrounds because they've got to be so super safe. They don't recognize that when you're so incredibly safety conscious, you actually lose things. Like you lose the kids the freedom to play, for example.
mm,
Like this whole idea, and this is a different subject, I know. As I said, I'm pretty even about bicycle helmets, but there's so many other things where controlling children, it makes it so difficult. People can be prosecuted for letting their kids roam free, which in other countries, like in Israel, say, is far more.
yeah.
Kids, 5-year-old kids can walk to school. Nobody thinks anything of it. And they've got a much healthier society than we do in those kinds of areas. So I
Yeah.
think the nanny state's gone much too far. What we do then is we keep our kids in the home and they sit in front of their devices and they're exposed to far more danger and evil people in those devices than they would be if they went walking around the streets
I
and
um,
getting
um
healthy and meeting friends and building social skills and all the things they're not doing when they're stuck at home. So nanny state's gone way too far. But
yeah.
bicycles, not sure.
I think it's funny again, the libertarians and the left, you go to Byron Bay, no one's wearing a bicycle helmet, but there's a lot of lefties there and Greenie voters, and then there's probably similar on the libertarian side. Um,
Well,
I've
my
got
kids reckon I'm super woke and left in some ways, and I am. But the way I look at it is it's for the sake of what's in the interest of ordinary people. I'm not
yeah.
concerned about the millionaires. People like me can look after ourselves. I'm saying, what about the battlers? What about people struggling to buy a house? People who are struggling to put bread on the table, for heaven's sake. I mean, they're the ones we've got to think about.
I'm definitely with you. I guess I'm really supportive of that attitude, Jim, especially if you're running for politics. But maybe I'll give you. I've got a couple more topics. I'm conscious of your valuable time, and one of them is, um, the impression I get is you're concerned about the opportunities for young people these days. And yet I had a guest. Have you heard of the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early? It's essentially a movement of people who grind it out, monitor their spending, know how to invest. And by in their 30s, they try and get to the financial situation they can retire and quit their job they don't like, do whatever they want. And the message boards on social media of that movement is, oh, now what do I do? I'm in my 30s, I'm financially independent. Doesn't the existence of this movement sort of say that the opportunities are there for people, and we just have high expectations or different expectations these days? What makes you think that the opportunities are quite different financially, either
Well,
to
there's
start a business,
opportunities that
become
people can
independent?
obviously
Yes.
do that kind of thing. But if you relax things like idiotic zoning regulations and so much of the
Yeah.
other government stuff, you'll make it easier for people to do what they want to do. Look, I think retiring early is terrible. I'm 73, and I often say my retirement ceremony, I'm going to be there, but I'll be in a box because I'll be dead. That's my retirement, full plan. All right, eulogies and everything, but I'll be dead. That's my retirement. Okay, I love work. I enjoy what I do. I find it exciting. I'm full of energy, as you can probably tell.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of retirement. Now, if you're doing a job that you hate and you can get yourself financially independent so you can do something you really want to do, you really love, get out of the corporate rat race and do something really wonderful, like say, buy a Jim's mowing franchise, work outside. You'd be surprised how many ex-corporates we've got doing that kind of thing, mowing and cleaning and stuff. They love it. It's a lifestyle. It's
Mm.
meaning. But people are meant to work. I think to actually think you can retire. People get old when they retire. I know people in their 50s who are old because they've retired. That's a very, very bad. I don't think God made us to sit and do nothing. The whole idea of retirement is wrong. If you've got to a certain age, you should be doing things that are useful. Now, you may not need to work for a living. Well, then go and do something. Go and work for the Salvation Army, or go and
Yeah.
work with the homeless, or do some non-profit thing, or there's lots of great jobs you can do. God meant us to work. We're not designed to work. If you look at the Garden of Eden, I'm not a creationist, but look at the model. Adam and Eve weren't slouching around the garden and sipping Mai Tais. They were actually gardening. I mean, read the account. That is how we are meant to live. We are happier. And people who become unemployed go down. Even for the most part, when they voluntarily employed, their mood goes down. They become less happy. We are meant to work. Now, we
Uh,
don't have to work for money. Is often a good motivator. People work because they need to pay their bills, and that's a good motivator. But it doesn't matter why you work. If you're wealthy enough that you can afford to do anything, just do something of value, real value to the community, value to others.
I mean, I'm sure I've read those types of things in self-help books as well, right? It's not just getting old. It gives you meaning and purpose and social connection. And yeah, it's funny because The Economist says working is bad. That's why we have to get paid. But I think human motivations are a little bit more complex than that, right? We seek social connection and validation as well, and work is also part of that. And so, we can also work and get paid and not do that and do things that cost other people and are bad for society. So getting that alignment of incentives seems really crucial to me. Fertility. I've seen that you have a book coming out. Is that right, Jim?
Birth rate crisis, probably about the middle of the year. Yes.
Well, I've been one of the people saying crisis. Birth rates hit below replacement in the 1970s, and suddenly in 2025-6, it's a crisis. Japan's population's fallen for 12 or 14 years. Japan's a beautiful place. It's the world's favorite place to visit right now. Why is it a crisis, do you think?
Well, at the present rate, in 200 years, there won't be any Japanese left. You look at it. You'd be able to fit the Koreans into my living room. These societies are dying. They're dying. And it's getting worse. If you look at the attitudes of the youngest generation, like the teenagers now, they are even more against family, children than their people who asked the same question 20, 30 years ago. So we're not talking about a permanent rate of 1.4. We're going to go down, 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 down. That's the whole trend. And it's the nature of what's happening to society that's making it happen. And yes, it is a crisis. It's bad. You can't have, we don't want exploding population. We don't want the world overrun with 100 billion people. That would be really unpleasant. But having the population go down and down and down, and one of the problems with that too is that it's not going to go down everywhere. You're going to have countries like Afghanistan and Somalia and the Sudan that have pretty high birth rates, and they're going to grow and they're going to expand. So what you're going to do is to have the whole world looking like Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan. And if you read the story and you think, is this the kind of world that we want for the future? You know, poverty, war, this kind of stuff. I don't think so.
I guess there's a great report from 1935 called about Australia's lost vitality from the Federal Treasury, which essentially wrote the same things. Fertility rates declining. This will never reverse. What are we going to do? How will Australia defend itself? What's happening? What about all the old people? And, you know, that's nearing on 100 years ago, and things are just better and better and better. And we're much older. We work longer. We work smarter today. Do you think in 100 years we'll look back in 2026 and be like, oh, that was so quaint, that fertility thing, things bounced around a bit? What makes you, I guess what I'm getting at is, what makes you think this is a permanent decline that will persist for multiple generations rather than a sort of generational ebb in a broader, you know, civilization flow?
That's the whole point of the book.
People
say, you ask people why they don't have children, and they'll say, well, I haven't got enough money, I want to get established in my career. It's financial reasons. So what the governments do all over the world is say, we'll give you money, we'll give you baby bonuses, we'll give you discount this, we'll give you free that. You know what happens? Absolutely nothing. Hungary is spending 5% of its GDP on this stuff, and it's having no effect at all. Maybe it's rising it from 1.4 to 1.5 fertility rate. That's children per woman. You need 2.1 to break it. So no country in the world, advanced country apart from Israel, is above 2.1. Okay, now what's causing this to happen? And there's a process that's going on. And it's like a drug addiction. Okay, what actually happens is this: there's certain things that cause your brain to become more or less sensitive to dopamine. It's all got to do with dopamine. So, for example, if you have a cocaine habit, what's actually happening is that you're taking cocaine and it's putting this burst of dopamine into your brain, and your brain reacts to this by saying, that's too much. I can't be flooded. So it dampens down the dopamine sensitivity. You become less sensitive to dopamine, so you need more cocaine to feel this. And after a while, just to feel normal, you need the cocaine. And that's the reason for that, is because the ordinary things of life, which produce a little trickle of cocaine, like work and relationships and family and church and all these kinds of things, that healthy little bits, they become boring because your brain is so desensitized. Now, that's effectively what's happening to the entire society. We're in a kind of now prosperity is one thing. Obviously, your drugs, things like porn, things like social media, which you burst, gambling, all these sort of things, status seeking, envy, all these sorts of environments doing the same thing. They're flooding us with these bursts of cocaine. Sorry,
of dopamine.
which has the same effect as cocaine. Then they're doing it, and we feel good by doing it. You know, we have a bit of a hit. We pay the gambling. We do whatever it is. It makes us feel good, but our brains are becoming less sensitive, and therefore that other things like work, family, faith, these kinds of things are becoming boring and meaningless, and also we're becoming more depressed all the time. Just as drug addicts become. It's the same process. That's the problem. And it's not going to go away because it's getting worse. And the further we go, the worse it becomes. And you can see so many signs. The work ethic is going down. If you look at attitudes of young people, they're less involved. Work that's meaningful. They want money. They don't want work that's meaningful. They don't put the hard work in. It's an attitude you can see. You can see it in the workplace. You can see it in opinions. Levels of mental illness is going up. Deaths of despair. which is suicide. That's going up.
Mm.
Suicide is rising. People are becoming more and more miserable and unhappy. That's this whole process. The only way you can do this, stop this, is you've got to work out a way of resensitizing our brains. Now, there's ways to do that. You can do it like the Orthodox Jews or the Amish. You basically have an incredibly disciplined society where you restrain, for example, sexual activity, especially in adolescence. Very good. You have fairly tight control of children. You cut yourself off in the world. You go against this. You're very cooperative. You have rules of behavior that govern your society. They even have different languages to keep them separate because the world is so corrupting. But you can do that. It does work. The Amish, the Orthodox Jews, they have very high birth rates. They're successful, but it won't work with the rest of the society. There is a solution though, and there's only one solution. You've got to work out a medication, a treatment, which can artificially have the same effect. So you give it to somebody who's a drug addict, whose brain has become desensitized. That's why they can't get off drugs. You actually give them something that says, okay, we'll resensitize your brain. So suddenly ordinary life, work, family, friends becomes attractive. And you can use it for all kinds of things like that. So you use this kind of medication, which would help people. Also, somebody who's depressed and demoralized, it should be really helpful for that. So use it as a medication. Kids with ADHD, for example, that's a problem, same thing. That'd be a tremendous treatment for that. So you work out ways of resensitizing the brain to dopamine. And if enough people take that, the birth rate's going to start to rise because family becomes attractive.
Well, I've not heard that before, but I've
No, you
heard
haven't.
everyone's theory of why fertility's declined, and the data is very hard to find a consistent story. But let me just try and paraphrase what you've said and summarize that the the environment of modern life is
Yes.
such that we have elevated dopamine from all this stimulation. So our body is, suppresses it when it's at its peak, and that suppressing force means that the low levels we don't even feel. It becomes boring. And
Yeah.
so we're not interested in, pursuing women and having families young, and we're only interested in radical big, the next great trendy thing. I
Yeah.
can definitely, I mean, I can see the argument there. A, a quick question then, do you think fertility rate in 10 years' time will be lower or higher than today? So 2026 is a real ebb in Australia. Do you think there's going to be a little bounce
All
at
right.
all?
You got $100,000 for a bet?
I
We
don't
don't
have
do anything.
100,000, but maybe we could bet a meal or in
I
10
would
years.
lay very, very heavy odds in 10 years' time fertility is going to drop. And you can easily see it because you look at the opinions of young people. And in
Mm,
fact, it's not only the fact that their opinions are actually in the same direction, they're going against marriage and family, but the decline is speeding up. It's become much, much more drastic, especially in the iPhone generation. They're the
yeah.
worst affected of all because social media is actually toxic for this kind of thing. And freely available porn and the rest of it is becoming worse and worse and worse. So you're going to find the fertility rate dropping dramatically. We're going to be like South Korea if we don't change. 0.7. They're having a third as many children. You take
Yeah.
Joel from the office that you probably had contact with. He took his little baby to Seoul to South Korea with his wife, and it's like a rock star because they see so few babies. They're not
Yeah.
having children at all.
Look, I mean, I'm not sure if it will be higher or lower in 10 years, but my eldest just finished high school, my youngest is in high school, and there is a bit of a pendulum swing culturally with young people becoming more conservative and more family oriented. There's a real pushback against wokeism. Now, maybe I'm in a bubble because
I don't see if you have a look at systematic. You could look at it anecdotally, maybe.
mm,
But if you look at the actual studies that have been done, the surveys that have been done, they show the
yeah,
opposite. They show that young people are less interested in family and marriage. Some of them more, but
mm.
most of them, the average is going down quite fast.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's some good surveys on conservative values and traditional traditional gender roles, and the young men under 24 have seen a rise in recent times. So I'm really interested if that is hinting at something. But if the broader trends aren't in its favor, perhaps that's just the
But
smallest of
you're
swings.
also quite right too. Young men are seeing the problem, but the women aren't going along. This is a male, and let's face it, the women need to have the babies. And what the women are tend to say, I can't find good young men. I
Uh,
can't find men who are steady. I can't find men who commit themselves. They want to play around. They want to have fun. Also, the young men want to be in control. They want to be in charge because men feel so emasculated these days, and that's particularly amongst the young. So you get this
yeah.
toxic masculinity things like
No,
there's
it's
some bad
definitely.
stuff going on in the manosphere, which is really nasty and exploitative, and it's all about men being powerful and men being in control. But it's not the kind of attitude that's going to get you a rise in the birth rate. Look,
I
my understanding of the process is this: it's the dopamine surge of the society, it's the competitiveness, it's the wealth, it's the gambling, the porn, the status, the envy. All these processes aren't going to go away. They're getting worse, if anything. The only thing that can reverse it to some extent is if we become impoverished. Like the Great Depression is a good example. Okay. Now, the Great Depression was a pretty nasty experience. But what happened to people who passed their late childhood in the Great Depression? They became the parents of the baby boom. So it's that
mm,
particular age group, 6 to 12. If you have a lot of poverty in that time, a real economic bad
yeah,
times,
squeeze.
then you actually do reverse this process. But
Mm,
that's poverty. So something like the Great Depression would have a little bit, but it's only just a blimp. That's how you
yeah.
get these changes. When you get a depression, things become worse. The kids growing up at that stage become a little bit more conservative. But then the depression passes and keeps
Yeah.
on going.
That makes sense. I'm conscious of your time, Jim. Have one more topic and I'd like your views on immigration. A lot of conversation today is that immigration the last few years has been far too high to be manageable. Some people, like myself, thought the 2006-7 boost was a little bit much, and that there's a trade-off here between the interests of the locals and the interests of the country being integrated globally. What's your take?
Okay, look, I have to say I'm a bit biased because we have a lot of new immigrants in gyms, and they are such wonderful, wonderful people. Also, staff members. My wife is an immigrant from China. She came out here 25 years ago, and she's an amazing asset to the economy. So there's a lot of great people out there who'd like to come to this country, and I want to welcome them. I do think we have to be very careful about refugees from war-torn countries. I know it sounds great to take somebody from Somalia who's from a refugee camp and let's give them a home in Australia, but they don't tend to integrate very well. They don't appreciate it very much. They tend to be stuck in poverty and they have very, very high levels of violence. For example, machete murders and going on in Melbourne, this kind of stuff too. We it's I think it's great to have smart business-like educated people from stable countries, places like India and China and so forth. I think we have to be very careful in who else we let in.
Yeah. And do you have a view on the numbers of like, do you think, a lower number makes the integration or the investment needed to expand hospitals, public infrastructure, housing, etc.,
Well,
more
it
manageable? Or do
depends.
you
It
think
depends,
it's
depends who the immigrants are. The
oh,
point of it is, if you take an immigrant who is highly skilled, like my wife is a good example, and she's actually running companies. She's an incredibly productive person. People like that are a net gain. You've got your dentists and your doctors and your
mm,
business people. They're a fantastic gain to the economy. The people who actually work in menial jobs for their whole lives and end up in prison and so forth, they're a net loss. Okay, so what you're going to try and do is to get more of the more valuable people. I mean, we can't save the world. We can't be compassionate about the world. We've got to look at our own interests of our own society. And I think we've got to attract people and bring the people in who are going to help. Now, one idea I have, I don't have to be practical. We say to them, listen, people come and they stay on student visas and they get job after job and they're mostly driving Ubers and stuff like that too. And they're just working out ways to stay. And I know this happens a lot. Okay. What if we had a system that said, okay, you can come in on a temporary work visa, ex-student or whatever, and your job is to pay enough tax. Now, if for 10 years you can pay this level of tax based on your employment, you can have permanent residence or something like that. So then you could do anything. You could get a good job, like if you're very valuable, like you become a manager in the business. Okay, fine, you're paid enough. Good. If you become if you're a Sparky and you're making good money from that, tremendous. If you want to buy a Jim's franchise and you build one and you're employing 10 people, fantastic. So why don't we let people have a try and then keep the ones that are actually contributing, and the ones that don't say thanks, go home. That's what I would do.
Fair enough. Jim, is there anything you want to share with the audience about potentially your run in politics coming up later this year in Victoria? If people can maybe go to a website and sign up and hear about what you're up to, what should people do who are interested?
Look, I'm a member of the Libertarian Party and I'm standing for it because I think they're the best in terms of, I don't see any major party that has the right policies. Liberals are better on business, but they're worse on zoning. Okay, the Greens are absolute shockers on everything. They're the worst. If the Greens get in control, I'm out of this country. This is death. Okay, but zoning is one area where I think potentially we can make a difference. I'm not hopeful about winding back government bureaucracy. I'd love to do it. I don't think it's going to happen, though. I don't think there's the move for it. But interesting thing about zoning reform is this, that when we talk about it, I have never seen any subject that gets such universal approval. It's like 96%. Now, you know me, I'm a pretty controversial guy. And I say a lot of things people get really upset about over COVID. Two of my daughters wouldn't speak to me for months because they were so angry about my stance. And a lot of people really hate me for it, okay? But when it comes to zoning, and we say we want zoning so that people can have affordable housing, affordable rent, get the homeless off the streets, the great majority actually are in agreement. And the ones that don't agree are usually the super affluent who have far too much power in the society. But it's a democracy, for heaven's sake. So I think it's something that could potentially change. They did it in New Zealand. They reckon house prices and rents are about 40% below what they would have been if they hadn't done it. Now, they didn't do it well enough, didn't do enough of it, but they did make efforts. They did come to cities like Minneapolis. There's a movement which is not left versus right. You can be very lefty, bolshy, and want cheaper housing. You can be very right-wing and want cheaper housing because you believe in libertarian philosophies. It's not left versus right. So this is an area we could potentially make a real change. And I think this coming up state election is an exciting potential because, in a sense, the best result would not necessarily be for libertarians to win, but enough people to vote for libertarians, for the major party to look at it and say, there are votes in this. So let's work on dismantling some of the zoning and let's have cheaper houses and cheaper rents. And if both prices get behind it, I'd get out of politics. I wouldn't be interested anymore. I'm only doing it for this reason. I want to make a fuss about this. And I think there's a possibility, genuine possibility, that we might actually get action because overwhelming the public says cheap, expensive housing, massive mortgages, young people struggling again is not a good thing.
So my regular listeners and readers will know that I'm not fully bought into that story of zoning and its effects, but perhaps we can find agreement on another part of that story, which is if you change the rules about property rights, like zoning or anything, those rule changes can change the value for the private property owner, right? And so if you upzone a bunch of people whose houses are worth $1 million and now they're worth 2 million as a development site and they all cash out and get $1 million for nothing, what's your take on charging or taxing a portion of that for the community?
Oh, I don't mind that, but
You don't.
the main thing is, look, I live on 5 acres, all right? It's out in Montrose, so and it's 5-acre covenant. You can't subdivide. If they got rid of zoning, you could put up 50 houses on that property, really nice houses, affordable houses. I might make some money out of it, possibly. But what I'd rather see is competition, because if everybody's doing it, then you've got to bear in mind this. Yes, if you take one property and you rezone it, the property price goes way up.
Mm.
because there's nowhere else to buy. But if you do that to
Mm.
the whole city, what's going to happen is that you're going to have so many people building houses that the developers won't be able to cash in. At the moment, you get an individual lot changed and they make a fortune. But if you do everybody, the competition will drive the price down. So why would I go and buy a house from your property, which has been grossly overpriced because you can afford to? I'll go and buy it somewhere else. You've got to get rid of all the zoning, not just one place.
Yeah.
And that's the problem you get to. Local councils have all this power, but the people who run them aren't paid almost anything. I mean, most of them not paid at all.
Yeah.
The mayor gets a stipend. But you give them decisions, they can rezone a property where suddenly a property owner's property is worth $2 million more than it was. That's a recipe for corruption.
I did write a book exactly about that problem and the corruption in councils. I guess my question would be, we've had zoning changes for a long time, and prices actually in, for example, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth were the cheapest they'd been to buy in 2018-19 for 20 years, right? You could get a 3.5% mortgage. Yields on houses were 4 or 5%. It was essentially cheap to buy a house. Now, I guess how does the zoning story fit with the fact that we had a cheap time to buy just 7 years ago? Now it's an expensive time, and it's still possible, like in Canada and New Zealand, that prices fall 30% from here with no changes to zoning. Doesn't that point to the sort of overall asset market and its cycles being a more important factor?
I believe in supply and demand, and I think in the long run that always comes out. If you have an essential, like if you have bread and it's short of bread, the price goes up. That's what happens.
Mm.
If it's something that you need to buy, like accommodation, you need. You've got to live somewhere. Okay. If you make it scarce, the price goes up. If you make it plentiful, the price goes down. The trouble is the market. People who run government think they're smarter than the market, and I can make the price go down while still making it scarce. Well, it doesn't work that way. You can try to, but it just doesn't work. Because that's the way the world works. That's the supply and demand. Obviously speaking, if
Yeah.
you have a demand for a certain kind of a person, like a computer programmer or something like that, if the demand becomes very high, prices go up. If there's a glut on the market and there's so many, the value goes down. It's
Yeah.
just
Look, we're going to have to wrap up. I guess I would just caution you that, for example, in the United States during the 2000s price boom in property, home ownership went up. Then when prices started falling, home ownership went down. People didn't want to buy an asset that was falling in value because why would I? I can wait a few years, and then only the increase in home ownership again has been during the last 10 years when prices have been rising
Yeah,
in
no,
the US.
you're
So,
quite right. When you get property booms like happened before 2008 crisis, where everybody was seeing property prices going up and up and up, and they wanted to get in, so they made these massive loans because they knew
mm,
they didn't have to pay them back because they knew that they can flip their house for another $200,000 down the track of it. So that makes it attractive, but it's a very short-term sugar rush. It's like having cocaine makes you feel good in the short term. It's terrible in the long term. In the long term, what makes people to buy is affordable houses. We can't rely on low interest rates pushing up the price of housing so people can still afford it. We
mm,
just need more affordable housing. And in the end, it doesn't happen short term. I'm not saying it's going to work in the next 6 months, but I'm saying over the next 5 years, if you make housing affordable, people will buy. The price goes down, sure, and the price is dropping, and then it reaches to the stage where it's 30% lower, and then it's stabilized out. And now people are saying, well, I couldn't afford to buy 5 years ago, but now I can. I'd like to start a family, so let's buy a house. Now, they may delay a bit. They may not want to buy it on the downswing, but
mm.
eventually they'll buy it.
Yeah, that's I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. You don't want to buy it on the downswing till you think it's bottomed out. So, Jim, I really appreciate your time. Your face I've seen on the side of trailers for decades now during my lawn mowing years and since. Um, I'll send the viewers to you. Any final words for the listeners, or if your zoning message is the main one for your.
I think we've got to have a society that looks to the interests of the ordinary person, the battler. There's too many cases of battling elites, and every major party has elites. With the Liberals, you've got the money elite. If you go to their fundraisers, they're all wealthy people. Mostly wealthy people. You can tell. You can ask their backgrounds. They're the people who fund the party. If you go to the Labor Party, it's the union elites. And they've got their own kinds of ideas, which is not that of their members for the most part. They're the people in charge. They want these overpriced projects with massive rake-offs and corruption and stuff. There's very strong interest supporting them. If you talk about the Greenies, you're talking about inner city, intellectuals and white collar workers, privileged lawyers, accountants, these kinds of people like that too. They've got their own interests. They're interests of the educated, privileged elites, the inner city elites. I don't think there's any party in any of those that really stands for what the interests of ordinary people are, because I see the policies that they all come up with and they're not in the interests of ordinary people. Why do we have so many bureaucrats, for example? Anybody can tell you, if you've got a management consultant and ask them what you could do with government, you could drop the cost of government by 50% easily in terms of bureaucracy, efficient processes. Why don't you? Because there's too many powers that be, which is the union movement, which is mainly these days in the public sector, who will resist it. You cannot fire anybody. You can't change anything. So who's the benefit? You've got a minority of public servants who are really interested in supporting people like the Greens and so forth to do their interests. And then you've got the vast majority of people who would love to have more money in their pockets. Who wins? The small minority who have a privileged interest in the thing. And that's the problem with anything at all. You have the interest of the great majority. We don't say anything.
Do you think people are saying things now by the One Nation polling?
They're very loud. Sorry, what's that?
People are getting their message now with the One Nation polling. People are like had enough of the major parties and their elites. What do you make of that? Is that a signal of what you're saying?
One Nation's they're no good. They're anti-immigration. I mean, for heaven's sake, if you look at their economic policies, they're no different to anybody else. They're not going to reduce the cost of government. They're not going to reform zoning. I don't see anything in their policies except this rabid anti-immigration. And I basically like immigrants too. I just think we need the good ones.
Yeah,
that's all. And I think being anti-immigration is look. I'm very biased. My wife, I'm crazy about it. She's an immigrant, for heaven's sake. So many of my workers are immigrants. Some of my franchisees are immigrants. They're wonderful people. I just think we need good people in this country, and a lot of the immigrants are a lot better than most Australians. I think we need those. But I don't like One Nation. I don't like the anti-immigration blanket idea. I mean, they used to be against Asians and so forth. The yellow peril. That's garbage. I remember that stuff when I was right back in the late 60s when it was white Australia. That's obscene. I mean, it really is. I mean, we should have moved beyond that kind of stuff. Let's have people who are good for this country.
Yeah, you're right. It's very hard to have a sensible debate on immigration about how to have rules that select for quality, how to manage the total number and not just be shut down everything, make the number zero, erect a wall around the country. It's funny because during COVID, I was cautioning before that, maybe immigration's a bit high, and then we closed the border. And I was the only one to say, a closed border is not good either, we should stay integrated and open to a degree. But you can't seem to have a moderate debate.
We have a massive privilege in Australia. We're a wealthy country which is attractive to immigrants, and we also have a nice moat around us, so it's not that easy to get in if we stop them. People the Europeans have it far worse. So does the Americans, because people just fly across the border. So we have this privilege of being able to choose the best people from anywhere in the world, and I think we should use that. It's a great privilege, especially if we're not going to have enough kids to replace ourselves. Why not get some really smart, enterprising, good people from overseas? And there's so many of them who'd love to come and live here. We just need to select them right. I think that we do a better job than a lot of countries. Our point system has real merit, but we could do a lot better. Yeah, I don't know that we need as many people as we're getting right now, but we certainly need to be careful who we take.
Yeah, that's a very sensible view, and it's very hard to articulate that in public. So I'm glad you've had the chance, Jim. I really appreciate your time. We've gone a little bit over. I know your time's valuable. Thank you so much, audience. I'll put some links in the show.
I love talking about such things, as you can tell. It's a funny thing, we do this thing called Ask Jim. People ask me questions about business, and they get a good reaction and stuff. But then you start talking about things like zoning, and I get actual applause from the audience, because people are passionate about this. It's a great subject, and it's something we could do something about.
That's brilliant. All right. Thanks so much, Jim. I'm going to wrap it up.
See you later.
Bye then.